Welcome, everybody. This is the Rotary E-Club of Silicon Valley, and every week we like to bring you a program with interesting people talking about things that are interesting to us. And to us, that really involves such stuff as innovation, entrepreneurship, and education, particularly as they relate to humanitarian service. And this week we have with us Ethan Senack in Washington, D.C. He is with Creative Commons USA, and he is going to tell us a little bit about how the world can be a better place in terms of how you might think about licensing. Not just how it's been done forever, but ways it's being evolved over the decade now, and probably going back to. I should let him explain the history of it, but it's a topic that's near and dear to my heart, and perhaps I will inflict on everybody why once we get into the Q&A. So with that, I'd like to hand it over to Ethan. Ethan, welcome to the Rotary E-Club of Silicon Valley.
Thank you, and thank you for the introduction. I appreciate it. So as you said, I do want to talk a little bit about licensing and everything. I just will say up front that my background is in education, so I've worked mostly on higher education policy. But what I'm going to try to do is speak a little bit more broadly about licensing and about the commons and sort of the new digital era. I think everyone has probably heard of the concept of the commons, a shared resource in the most broad sense of the term. That everyone from the public can have access to. And throughout our history, we've participated in various forms of the commons. Hundreds of years ago, the commons was principally physical resources, so forests and herds, etc. We can talk about how the physical commons has evolved over the past few centuries, but the short answer is that most of it has been sold off to private industry, and what hasn't is maintained by the government, like national parks. In tandem with that, there's always been a cultural commons as well. Stories and legends, religion, art, history, all of these things that existed in a space where the public could share and participate in them freely. And so that second half is the piece that I want to focus on and that my organization works on. Like the physical commons, many people have lost access to the cultural commons in the modern era. In the past 100 years or so, the idea of the commons, this shared sort of public accessible resource base, faced a lot of resistance. The fervor for capitalism was at its peak. Some of the first intellectual property giants were fearful of losing their markets. This is looking at you, Disney. And copyright in general became broader and broader in scope. At the same time, you had a bunch of economic theorists who came out talking about the tragedy of the commons, which envisioned, a cultural and society of takers who would remove resources from the commons without putting anything back in. And so just as an example of this, I'll talk about copyright because that's what I know best. The copyright system was created to encourage innovation by ensuring authors and creators were compensated for their work. The government felt they would be able to encourage more people to invest and put their time and resources into the game. If you look back at copyright, though, these protections were opt-in. So when an author created a work, they would decide which rights they wanted to reserve, use a license that described those terms, and then the rest of the rights would go to the public. Today, that dynamic has reversed, and the default is that all works are created under an all rights reserved license. You don't even have to assign that license yourself. It's automatic the second that you write or create something. And that all rights reserved license, you'll see it on books, on pictures, on pretty much everything these days, means that no one can use it, share it, build on it, do anything with it without your individual and express permission first. There are a few exceptions to the rule like fair use, but I'm not going to go into those right now. So as you can imagine, that had a sizable effect on innovation and the spread of knowledge. And as a result, the commons began to dry up. Knowledge, research, culture, art, these things became more and more exclusively available to people who had the resources to access them. So back in 2001, a group of lawyers got together to create a license that would restore some of that flexibility into the market. It would give creators and authors the ability to grant some rights of reuse back to the public while retaining the rights that were most important to them, whether it was attribution or keeping the work in its original form. These licenses allowed works to be placed back into a commons where the public could benefit. Eventually, obviously, these licenses became known as the Creative Commons licenses, and our organization has existed to advocate for equitable access to knowledge ever since. Being the club in Silicon Valley, there are tons of parallels that, like software is actually one of the most appropriate. Understandably, as the computer market exploded, companies were very cagey about protecting their code and their software, strictly managing interoperability and all of that. In fact, there are legal battles still raging today about the boundaries of those intellectual property protections. But over the years, millions of coders looked at their work and realized that they were spending hours and hours recreating code that someone else had already written, and further delaying their advancements and their own innovations. So even earlier than 2001, in the 1980s and the 1990s, the free and open source software movement really paved the way for this conversation. These were coders that decided they could leap forward if they shared basic code and built on each other's works, and it's been incredibly successful so far. The important thing, though, is that all of this is possible because of the internet, because it moved knowledge from a finite good to an infinite good. The number of books, instead of being limited by the number of books you can print or how many copies of an artwork you can paint, information has become a non-scarce good. You can create a PDF, and an innumerable number of people can download it without draining that resource or using it up. Because of the internet, I'm happy to share that there are over 1.2 billion Creative Commons licensed works in the world today, and those are just the ones we can find. They've been viewed 136 billion times online. They encompass 34 languages and span across fields and industries. But still, we're nowhere near where we could be. One of the best parts about the Commons so far is that it has not operated in the way that economists from the 1950s thought it would. Users aren't draining the Commons by taking and putting nothing back in. In fact, there are tons of new models forming around the Commons to ensure that creators and authors are compensated for all of their hard work, time, and ideas. We're actually seeing many creators derive more benefit from releasing their work to the Commons than they would under a proprietary system. Just some examples: when it comes to journals and research, open access papers are viewed more, they're cited more, and they are used in successive studies more often. Textbook authors, instead of spending 1,000 hours to write a textbook and gambling that you'll make a few $1,000s in royalty once it's released, are actually being funded up front to create these works as a public good and share them with the rest of the country and the rest of the world, really. In photography, you'll see artists experiencing major bumps in traffic and reuse when they share their works under an open license rather than an all rights reserved ones. And the great thing is that society benefits too. Just some small examples of this are cities who collect data, for example, on traffic patterns that end up being stored and no one actually ever revisits or analyzes. More and more communities are actually releasing that data and receiving tons of input from community organizations and community members who have the time to do analysis and propose solutions. We're seeing this in city planning and city agriculture as well. Another example is that the federal government funds billions of dollars on health research every year. But oftentimes, the firm or whoever the recipient of that grant is will be given a sole license to that work. And so a year later, the government will actually have to fund someone else to do the same study because other people don't have access to it, instead of funding the next step of that research and actually advancing solutions. And of course, the one most near and dear to me is with students and with higher education. Students are failing courses, they're dropping out of college, all because they can't afford their books and assignments even after they've paid tuition. With open educational resources, we could ensure that all students, no matter their socioeconomic status, have access to the same high quality resources. And in places that have started using open educational resources, we've seen increases in completion, student retention, and just student performance. So there's really a tremendous amount of potential. And lest I forget, there is also room for private industry. Open licensing is certainly a substantial disruption when it comes to many traditional business models. Textbook publishers, for example, have really struggled to adapt to a digital age. And open licensing definitely threatens their business model, but it's a model that has not yet actually adapted to an era where the internet makes information so freely accessible. But the important thing is that many private companies have found ways to build up services around the commons while maintaining that core public access, providing additional support, user-friendly interfaces. There is a lot of room for that part of society as well. So we're in a time of incredible potential. We know that the internet can improve access. We know that it can make a difference when it comes to equity, access to information, knowledge sharing, research, and culture as well. So we work around the clock to partner with institutions, to partner with state governments and federal governments, to help put more of this intellectual property into the commons, and hopefully ensure that everybody has access to the same great information. So that's a little bit more about what we're working on.
Very cool. Thank you very much. I have plenty of questions myself, but I also want to make sure that that our gallery can leap in as well. I want to introduce the gallery as we go. So as I call your name, assuming your webcam is not muted, please wave. So first here in San Jose is Cecilia. Cecilia. Oh, actually, let me also get us to gallery view on that. There we go. Cecilia, welcome.
Thank you.
In Kamloops, British Columbia, we have Roger. Excellent. And in Palo Alto, we've got Monique.
Hi.
Cool. And so if anybody is ready to go with a question, I'll be happy to pass it along to you. Just wave at me if that's the case. Ethan, let's see. Let's go with Monique's question to get us going.
Yeah, Ethan, thanks. Great presentation. As a librarian, I am familiar with Creative Commons and the good work that you do. I'm curious to know if you have any comments or can talk about any of the work Creative Commons is doing around the subject of net neutrality in general.
Yeah, thank you. And also, I just do want to say that librarians in so many ways are leading the charge on college campuses right now. It has been a pleasure to work with librarians, and I know so many are out there really advocating hard for students and for their institutions, and so I'm always thankful when I get to talk to a librarian. In terms of net neutrality, as you can kind of tell, a free and open internet is pretty integral to the free sharing of information and everything that we stand for. So Creative Commons is a strong proponent of net neutrality. We have participated in Days of Action along with a lot of other sort of organizations that are influenced by this, and we will continue to raise our voice in support of it. But it follows that in order to have a commons and have a marketplace of ideas and have free sharing of information, we need an internet that is not dominated by particular industries or companies. So we will see what happens in the next couple of weeks here in DC. Things are not looking great right now, but we're never going to give up the fight.
Excellent. Cecilia.
Yes, so I was a textbook user about 5 or 6 years ago when I took a slew of accounting classes, and the cost of those books was absolutely breathtaking. Even used, they were, $180 to $250, and you knew they were $300 to $400 each. And I know that in the hard math and sciences, they could be more. So my question is, do you think we will ever get in the textbook world kind of where Philippe Kahn is with Khan Academy, or even close, where, I can see how a problem for particularly students that don't have a lot of money, by the time they get finished paying their tuition, they have nothing left for anything else. And to think that they might have to spend, upward of $1,800 or $2,000 a year for books in whatever form, e-form, used books, or whatever, that just seems unfair to me. And it really is an inhibiting factor to someone's education.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Like, the cost of textbooks has gone up 88% just in the past decade. It's actually increased faster than the rate of inflation. There's only like 2 other industries that do that. One is medical supplies and prescription drugs, and the other is tuition,
Right.
which is not really the company that you want to be keeping. Unfortunately, textbook publishers are, instead of capitalizing on the internet to help lower costs and offer more consumer-friendly options, they're by and large using digital rights management to further restrict access and maintain those high prices. Students are kind of in a bind, which is that they don't actually have any decision-making authority, because the professor is the one that picks the book. And then the student has to be the one to pay for it, which means they have no economic power to help regulate prices. And actually, there's another parallel to prescription drugs, right? Your doctor is the one who prescribes it, you buy it. That's one of the reasons costs are so high in the US. But we have this issue with the marketplace, and we have resistance from publishers. But there is a really increasing trend towards open textbooks in the United States and in Canada as well, and actually many other places around the world. There are, I think, over 5,000 or 6,000 faculty that have adopted openly licensed textbooks in the U.S. One of the most used textbooks is from a company. It's a nonprofit publisher called OpenStax, which actually has 30 or so entry-level textbooks that are all available online for free. You can download them, you can remix them, they're completely accessible. And there's a really sizable movement towards that. There's a group called the Open Textbook Network, which has 600 member institutions from the US and around the world that's actually working on sort of more organic textbook publishing, which I think is just a really fascinating divergence from the way traditional publishing looks right now. Because it does hurt students. We know over 65% of students have skipped buying a book because of cost. And we know the majority of those students feel like it's going to impact their grade and make them do worse. Knowledge textbooks, these things shouldn't cost $300. Calculus has been the same for 400 years. We don't need the 27th edition with a different cover and a different order of practice problem.
Right. The rules of accounting did not change very much in 30 years, probably, but and that was like 2012 when I did that. So those books are probably 50% higher than they were at that time.
I'd like to toss,
it is incredible.
I'd like to toss a shout out to CK12. CK12.org is an organization that Neeru Khosla is the founder, and she she hails from India, and she was kind of aware of the fact that all of these schools in rural places in India, that, they actually had access to the internet, but they didn't have the money to buy textbooks. And she thought, well, what if we could make these kind of flexible textbooks available online for free, which makes her a hero to me, right? But a lot of really strong content there. They've made them flexible so that teachers can adapt them in interesting ways. I love that kind of approach to addressing, the very needs we're talking about.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. There are a lot of really cool organizations who are pushing for this. And it's been interesting, just in the past, couple of years, we've seen Pearson and Cengage and a bunch of the major publishers either declare bankruptcy in order to restructure or announce a major restructuring away from being a textbook publisher and towards a digital content provider. And actually, Cengage Learning, which is one of the biggest publishers in the country, just announced an OER-focused platform that they'll be offering to students over the next couple of years. I myself have my own skepticisms around that, but it'll be interesting to see if they're leading the charge towards a more consumer-friendly model.
All right. Do we have another question? Roger. So,
in regards to textbooks, the real problem has been the increased costs of producing textbooks in terms of the printer costs, in terms of machinery, and also labor. And it's not so much the content, but it's the actual cost to produce. And that is what has gone up so dramatically. But I do feel that that in the marketplace will be ultimately adjusted, because there will be a demand within our society for cheaper textbooks. And through the internet, and whether it be through free content via internet or by things like Kindle, those things will force down the prices because they are presently available, and the publishers will have to go along with that in order to keep competitive. But I think the overall problem here is much more basic, and that is that education is not a gateway to always greater opportunity. It is, education today has become what I would say is a catch-all phrase, which is meant to basically go into college or university. I would say for the student, it's or the person, it's the accumulation of skills, however they are obtained, which is the gateway to opportunity. And there's a big difference between the first statement in terms of education and the obtaining of skills.
Roger, I want to give him a chance to reply to your.
Okay.
Yeah. So, Ethan.
Well, I mean, I think you're making a lot of fair points. Like, I think especially actually one of the most interesting things about open licensing is the way it's sort of it removes a lot of the gatekeeping of knowledge. So right now, sort of as you're saying, the traditional idea of education is that you go to a university and you get a degree and you sit in the chair. And there is a lot of effort right now around building sort of competency degrees, badging, alternative educational methods. And, just on a more practical and skills-based sense, there's a large push, at least here in the US, around more vocational training, more skills-based, job-focused training. And I think all of those are positive things. There are many ways to get an education. And one of the best parts about open licensing is that it opens up the doors for that to happen. You don't need to pass through one of the traditional gatekeepers in order to get a degree, in order to learn these skills. you can do it on your own. You can take, MIT or Harvard classes online for free, whatever you want. You can watch Khan Academy videos, and you can take free courses from Saylor Foundation. And I think that is an important development and something we need more of, because, the traditional student is no longer the traditional student. The average student today is not, 22, just out of high school. We have more working families and mothers and sort of folks going through job retraining than we've ever had. And we need a marketplace that actually serves those people, when we can't expect them to be on a college or university 12 hours a day.
One more question before we wind everything down. Ethan, you are with Creative Commons USA, and that is a different organization than creativecommons.org, right? And can you explain the difference between the two?
Yeah, I'm happy to. So Creative Commons is a global network. It's technically based in the US and Canada, North America, but it actually has affiliates and local chapters in about 85 countries around the world. So we are at the USA affiliate. We're based here in DC, but we work on forwarding the organization's priorities within the jurisdiction of the US. So there's a CC Canada, there's a CC United States, there's a CC India, and Poland, and so on. So we help further the organization and our goals in the United States, and we work sort of Creative Commons Global actually coordinates all of these efforts internationally.
That's cool. It's cool to understand that this is something, especially with the complexities, from country to country to country about intellectual property. So I want to honor the time of our viewers as well. I'd like to thank everybody who has joined us this week for the program. I certainly want to thank Ethan for such cool content, and you're out there doing the work of the heavens. I figure, making things possible for a lot of people, and I love that it's not. It's not simply, kind of a charitable sense. I mean, it's very much, how do we foster innovation through options in terms of copyright? So for all of you who have been viewing this program, make sure to let us know you were here. There is an attendance little survey bit just below us. Make sure to fill that out. And then in the discussion section at the bottom, please add your thoughts. What strikes you about this program or any other piece of our meeting? We love to hear from you. And with that, I'd like to pass it back to Ethan for the last word. I will say to our viewers, as always, we after we finish the recording, we get a chance to talk to these interesting people more. So make sure to join in on these recordings. We love having lots of people take part. Ethan, I will hand it over to you for a final word.
Sure. Well, I just wanted to say thank you for giving me the chance to talk to all of your folks, for Roger and Cecilia, and Monique. I appreciate your questions. Hopefully my answers were satisfactory. You can always follow up with us for more info. It's just creativecommonsusa.org. You can send us an email or follow us on Twitter. We're happy to answer more specific questions. I didn't actually talk about the licenses in depth, but we are happy to do that at any point. We strongly believe in a world with equitable access to knowledge that spurs innovation and development and growth. And so hopefully all of you, this will make you consider using a CC license if you're producing something, or encourage you to support other folks in your community who are doing the same. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Ethan. And everyone else, we'll see you next week.